it no more. We got a mind of our own.
Hey, good morning, sisters and brothers, and all citizens of the world, and welcome to another edition of Live from the Heartland at Home. This is number 16 for the week of August 9th in the year of 2020. I just want to share a little information that we are back on CAN TV. So if you want to check your cable news channel, not cable, but the local news channel, we're on every week a few times, and we're glad to be there. You can also catch us anytime at youtube.com/heartlandmedia. And we are on our regular time at WLUW.org and WLUW 88.7, 9 o'clock on Saturday mornings. So with all that said, we want to first say we are very saddened by what has happened in Beirut, Lebanon, and our hearts go out to all the brothers and sisters there. Having said that, we're going to talk about a few good things that are going on, and I'm going to turn first to my cohort, Katie Hogan. What's been happening for you, Kate?
Let's see. It's always kind of tricky. What happened this week was I had 2 full walks with my old walking buddies who were back in town together. And so it was nice to put together 2 3-mile walks in the same week. I also noticed that I am still the only one who hasn't had a haircut amongst the 3 of us. This has got to change.
How about you, Tom?
Well, we welcomed our new granddaughter, Rebecca Lee Clark, arrived on Thursday evening.
Congratulations.
Very exhausted couple of parents. They had all-day labor, and but things went well. You know, it's a new playbook in this pandemic era. We learned by text what was going on from beginning to end pretty much, and we've had our first Zoom session to meet the granddaughter, and we're still working out how the extended bubble is going to work out. Hopefully we'll see her sometime in the next month or 2, but we'll see how that works out. Everyone's doing well. We're very excited. It's pleasant to have news like this in the great Mandela with everything else going on in the world. Michael, what have you been up to?
Well, some of you will remember our good friend Kurt Monson, who used to be a bartender over at the Red Line Tap, and Kurt has been working on my attic, getting a little 3-room.
Got it done?
It's done, and but it followed some bee stinging going on, and a couple of dudes came in with hazmat outfits and doing a bunch of things, so there were no more bees. So Kurt finished it up, and Hal is now moving into that room as I speak. And it took a bunch of weeks, but it's really good that I got all the younger generation of my family here. And life goes on.
In case you didn't notice, we have a guest with us this morning. Our dear friend Susan O'Halloran is checking in from Florida. Sue, putting you on the spot a little bit, what was a good thing that happened to you this week?
I get to swim every day outside, and that to me is beyond lovely. And I take my snorkel and mask sometimes and just sit at the bottom, meditate underwater. It really calms me and gets a good night's sleep going. So it's hot here, but in the mornings and the evenings, you can be outside. So I bike or walk in the mornings. I swim every night. So that is a good thing. And we had a new baby in our family as well. And Emilio is very healthy, and everybody's doing well.
Michael.
Well, Sue, I wanted to say that you just took away my question for you about, I used to see you at the YMCA in the little pool, going through various kind of water gymnastics, and I was about to ask you, I had planned on asking you, are you still swimming down there in Florida? And you took care of that. So we missed you at the McGaw YMCA. We missed you up at McGaw, which does have people coming back in a very secure kind of manner, apparently. And I won't be looking for you in the pool, but I'll think of you.
Thank you, Michael.
So we've been covering COVID, as you can expect, and Pew Research just out this week shows that 69% of Americans say their greatest concern is that state governments have just opened up too quickly. Only 30% say that their biggest concern is that we've been too slow to let the economic engine run again. You know, I think a lot more of us are concerned about public health and, you know, maybe even that next paycheck, which also ended this week thanks to the Senate not acting. it's pretty hard to see this lack of a national response, any kind of public health mandates to really get this thing curbed. I think we lost a big opportunity.
Oh, so big. And I'm just going to shoot it in here. If you got the chance, look up an article by Wade Davis, anthropologist, wrote an article called The Unraveling of America in Rolling Stone last week, for those of you watching this later. It is a little heartbreaking, I have to say, but it's also clear as a bell and gives us a historic overview of what American exceptionalism came from and why it's disappearing. That's all I'll say for that. But it's one of the things that I felt good about this week was signing up with something called Protect the Results, which is a coalition of activists and groups who are pledging to stand up for the election results in November, no matter what the White House might be doing. And I should say, because of what the White House might be doing. So protect the results. Keep an eye out for that bunch, because there will be versions of that, I think, in a variety of ways.
On the schools reopening front, after Chicago Public Schools put a lot of parents and grandparents and teachers and others through the hoops trying to figure out hybrid, remote, in classroom, the schools decided this week to go to all remote learning in the fall. It really is following important public health mandates with infection rates rising. There really was no alternative, although it has now parents scrambling for how do we actually pull this off. I'm working. My kid's going to be at home now. I know how online learning worked in the spring. It didn't. We still have 1/3 of students without decent broadband at home. How are they supposed to do distance learning? I mean, again,
Tom, isn't this what you wanted, though? You didn't want to send your kid back to school, right?
Grandkid.
I know, grandkid.
right. That certainly this is the practical thing, but it was hard to see how we would fit into the other plans that were being discussed. And there's a month now to plan for how this might work better this fall than it did in the spring.
Right.
But we're still nervous about that. And the inequities begin to come into play, which I'm sure we'll be talking about with Susan in a few minutes, because, some of us can afford to put a smaller pod together and, to keep some of this. We're going to open our backyard maybe once a week. But how many people even have backyards to offer in their cramped apartment? I'm concerned about the broadband issue. It's another example of the safety net that we don't have. We've harped on this for a while, but to my mind, returning to normal is not what should happen in this pandemic. Everyone having free broadband that's fast and gives equal access to the digital age and economy, that's a critical thing to not return to normal on, but to see come out of this in a good way. And that could happen this fall, because it has to happen this fall.
Yeah.
Right. The other thing that's happening right now are the last of the state primaries, and they have brought a few surprises to long in office Democrats. Two progressive wins in this past week's primaries include Cory Bush in Missouri, which also passed the expanded Medicare item on the agenda, which was a real good move.
My hats off to my dear friend Jamala Rogers, an organizer down in St. Louis, who is one of the leaders in this thing. This is really fallout from the Ferguson organizing going back 5 years. We're seeing local community leaders who are at the forefront of that movement to bring national highlight and spotlight to that, now getting elected to local office. It's really phenomenal development in the state of Missouri, of all places.
Well, the second notable win was Marketa Bradshaw in Tennessee, who is also of the Black Lives Matter organizing in that state, and probably doesn't have much of a chance against the Republican in November, but you never know. You never know. So
Historic election.
Huh?
Historic election.
And,
I think we should introduce our guest and start talking about her
okay.
work.
All right. Hi, Suze.
Hi.
Let me let people know that what you're looking at on the screen right now is three of us were a troika starting in the 60s in our little pod of organizing then, which was called YCS, Young Christian Students. And our first organizing efforts were against the segregation of Chicago schools and the general racism that caused that segregation and promoted it and maintained it. And here we are. I don't want to say how many years later. It's about 60 years later, isn't it? Almost. Yep. Almost 60 years later. That the three of us are still working on this issue, and the whole nation is still working on this issue. And Suze, you've been doing anti-racism work since we started it, pretty much.
Yeah, we got quite a start. We were mentored by incredible people. Maybe everybody doesn't know or remember that Dr. King lived in Chicago for a while. In the 60s, he came to highlight the discriminations up north, in particular housing, when he lived on the west side. And we had these amazing adults who were working with Dr. King and his people, and then they would work with us, and they would turn around. And I found a couple things. Can I read it to you?
Sure.
Oh, yes.
Statement of a vision.
Oh my gosh, yes, I have that.
Yes.
Hold that up again, Sue.
Pardon?
Hold that up again.
The mirroring comes up backwards, but Tom, Kate, and I, along with several other wonderful folks, today in our city of Chicago, an pressing controversy confronts us all. On one hand, there's the deep feeling of unjust and unequal opportunity in the then called Negro community. And on the other hand are the fears of a white community facing neighborhood change. And the press conference goes on. What we were trying to do was the Redmond Plan, the Chicago Freedom Movement started with parents just boycotting, protesting the schools in Chicago. We're so overcrowded, like over half of the schools in Black neighborhoods were by definition overcrowded. We had kids sitting on stages of auditoriums with volleyball nets across so the little kids wouldn't fall off. We had kids in what was called, they were Willis wagons, were what they were called after Superintendent Willis. And it started with that kind of movement. And what we did, Tom Clark says, so far all reactions pro and con to the Redmond Plan to integrate the schools have come from the adults. We feel it's time for students to speak out on this issue, which directly affects us. And then it goes on that Katie says quality education is integrated education. We talk about
like I knew.
Yeah, right. What's interesting is we did a whole thing on statistics about education. I just finished a program for the Illinois Association of School Boards, and it was, I mean, I did the whole history, but still to read our statement, it was astounding to me to see how much hasn't changed. Yeah. You know, the fact that the ratio of older teachers to new teachers is supposed to be like 95-5. And we in our statement here talk about how many times it's 50-50, that in the Black schools, they're getting half new teachers, and in some cases it's 10-90, 90% are new. And that has not changed at all. And, you know, the changes are so small and finite. And I've got all kinds of statements in here like, we're young enough to deal with the causes, the tired adult generation, and now we're the tired adult generation. I'm so glad we started this. Obviously, it's been my life's path. And at the same time, it's like how much has changed, how little has changed. And somehow we have to hold both of that. And when we in here make statements, we got to get to the root causes of racism. I feel like we're still doing that. And maybe after all the murders, George Floyd et al., there's a little opening that people are starting to look a little deeper than there's a few bad apples theory. Maybe.
So can we ask you what has changed? If you look at the span of your work and this incredible moment of movement like we've never seen as big before?
I'm feeling it very much because I do a lot of work in corporations. I work with school systems probably the most, but I'm doing more and more with corporations. I have never had corporations calling and asking for anti-racism training. Diversity, yeah, and maybe we do a spotlight on race. And not that there wasn't good things that happened in those workshops, yeah, but I couldn't use words like anti-racism in the corporate setting without a whole bunch of people flipping out. Certainly, I couldn't talk about white supremacy. The program I'm doing right now for an insurance and other corporations, I'm talking about the ideology of white supremacy, the system of white supremacy. Being careful, of course, to make sure people are not a condemnation against individual white people, but this is a system, and people are starting to look at the history. And I do the whole thing of when people were blatantly saying things like Stephen Douglas in the Lincoln debates, this is a white nation built for white people on the basis of white people. People didn't just, obfuscate the way they might today. That this two-tier system got set up and everything flows from that. And I'm finding an opening for people to look at that. And then it's not just why do we talk about it's all in the past. No, then connect the thread. There's direct link from the origins of that more intentional discrimination to what we're experiencing today that give us outcomes like 90% of the wealth in this country is held by white people, 2.3 by Black people, 2.6 by Latinx. It's like, well, how did we get there? And if we don't make those connections, we won't see how it's showing up in the corporations, in the workplace today. So I'm finding people who I work with will now say, oh, another way we might be unconsciously, unintentionally, institutionally racist is, and that's a big change. From let's look at diversity of thought. Let's look at even LGBT gender issues. This is different. Will it be sustained? That's the question, isn't it?
This is the kind of debate I have with my daughter, who's immersed in this kind of work. I'm not sure where that came from in her foundation, in her philanthropy work. But when I brought up diversity training, she shot it down right away. I'm glad that Katie framed this in terms of anti-racism work. But even there, she has an issue about white people doing anti-racism work. From her perspective, we're talking about equity, and increasingly in her work, they move beyond equity to justice work. When does jargon begin to get in the way of our helping people understand what it is we're talking about here? I think language is important, but there's this evolution even in how you talk about your work, not just what you can talk about inside it, but how we describe it is pretty fascinating. That evolution.
It's fascinating, it's troublesome, it's expected. There's so much to say on this. I want to say that in getting involved with diversity firms that I've worked with over the years, coming from an anti-racism community background, I actually found it a relief to talk about diversity in this sense, that was a way into race. Once people looked at all these different dimensions of diversity and saw there were insiders and outsiders, privileged and not so privileged, on all these dimensions, I found an opening for people identified as white to not feel so guilty that they got paralyzed. Because obviously there's the beat up the white people strategy. And there's a time for every season. There's probably a time to yell at white people. And I saw so much progress in terms of real things like how many people of color are hired, et cetera, by doing diversity. And I understand that it also could be a way to skirt around the issue of race. And then when it comes to anti-racism, I like the term that Melody Hobson used. Some of you might have seen her YouTube, colorblind or color brave. To be color brave to me means that now some businesses and other nonprofits and such are looking directly at race, not running away from it. And that makes just a huge difference. And of course, these are justice issues as well. And even what we call people, I use people of color when I'm trying to talk about whole bunches of folks, right? But that can be used as a linguistic hideout, if you will. Like if people only talk about people of color when we're talking about police brutality, the criminal justice system, that can hide what's specifically happening to Black people. So now we'll see a term like Black, Indigenous, people of color. We're trying to say there are many things in common, but each community's dance with racism has also been unique. So it's always going to be a problem. And after a certain point, Tom, I'm like, tell me what you're doing. Like I'm working with organizations that are, I call it passing the purity test. Used to be back in the day, are you Mao or enough? Or
yeah.
Whatever. Now it's like, are you woke enough? And it's important that we have a clear analysis, because a good analysis is going to help us get the right prescription for change. And at the same time, if we get stuck there and who's proving who and judging people and whatever, I'm just at a certain point, like, stop talking, tell me what you're going to do.
I'm there already.
What?
Yeah. I said, I'm there already. Yeah. I have to keep my lip buttoned around the newer generation of organizers, and but I love what they're doing.
Yeah, and I love it too. And
Doing it.
I want to say something about that, because I work with young people. I love them. And there's a caveat to let the young people lead, because this was us. We were doing stuff as kids.
Right.
And the range of what I didn't know back then, my heart was in the right place. My feet were in the right place. We were moving, having press conferences. We were having workshops where we brought kids from all over the city together to talk about these issues. And the young people today are doing amazing things. And we all, I remember people saying to us, well, the young people will figure it out. It's like we all have to figure it out. There's a place
Right.
for everybody. And
Right.
people from middle age to older, we've got certain experience and wisdom and power because of the positions we have, because of maybe a little money we have, maybe. It's really important that I have to listen to young people all the time. And on this current project, there's a number of millennials who are on my design team. And I love that they keep stopping saying, yeah, but yeah, it's really important. And other times I'm like, could we just try this and see if it works? And then let's talk about it.
I think, Suze, you and I can agree that we can blame Tom Clark for actually having held a press conference when we were 17 years old, right?
Was
I
that
think it was
Tom's idea?
Peter. I think it was Peter Foote, actually,
Okay.
that got
But-
us to do the press conference.
But you
But
were
it was
right
my
there at
first-
Peter Foote's elbow going, aha, I think I'll do more of this, right?
Yeah, it was
Can
fun
I say
having
one
the
thing
TV
about that
camera
press
show.
conference, why it was a really important turning point for me, besides that there were these kids on TV talking about race and the pushback I got in my neighborhood about it, all was important and informative.
I got more than you did.
There was a cameraman who was African American who was fussing with my mic or doing something. And he said that something about, I can't remember how he put it, but something about the Southern migration of Black people. And in my white neighborhood, we talk about neighborhood change. There were blockbusters calling up saying, you got to get out now. I can still get a good price for your house while your kids are still safe. People made millions, unscrupulous realtors and others, turning those neighborhoods. We were all victimized by that. But I never knew where they were coming from. How come they could take over whole neighborhoods? But there was this frozen part, like if you were, I don't know what we called ourselves then, progressive or whatever, you didn't ever want to say anything against Black people. So you had to not look at certain things. Like I didn't know how come there were so many people could move into a whole neighborhood, turn it from Black to white. And when he told me just a little bit about the migration, and it was like, oh my God, people aren't reproducing like crazy, all those things, both getting that piece of information was important, but understanding how much racism freezes our brains. That if you want to be good, now we want to be woke or whatever, there's certain things you won't look at or talk about. And that was a big moment for me to say, I've got to open my brain. I can't just toe the party line to look like a good white person. And that has been a guiding principle for me and gotten me in a lot of trouble, I can tell you. But I think it's part of the reason that my programs resonate, because it's not like trying to push a party line down people. It's like really being in it together and exploring and understanding how all of us have been used in this crazy setup of a dual society.
Can I ask you something a little less, I don't know, woke? And that is, how's the culture shock living in the middle of Florida after moving from Evanston?
Yeah, it is a culture shock, definitely. I've never lived somewhere where there's so many Trump signs, definitely. And for a while, I was doing fine. When I do my morning walks, I go by Trump sign. I'd wish those people well. It was part of my little morning spiritual practice. After the murders, I have to tell you, I just had to take a major break. And if I'd hear at the pool, if there were I go at night usually, so there's not many people or nobody at the pool. But if there were people and I'd hear things like, if they just wouldn't cause trouble, there wouldn't be so much trouble. And then I'm like, I'm going to kill somebody. So I'm not always understanding. I'm not always patient. And a lot of those people, like the people we grew up with, I grew up in a outwardly racist community, are wonderful people, would give you the shirt off their back. So I'm trying to hold all of that. And before I decided to move here, I went to the Democratic Party Club, and there were 600 people there. And I thought, well, I don't need more than 600 friends. You know, this is good. I'll be okay. And I have to say, this is the most active political group I've been around. Before the quarantine, I knocked on more doors than I ever have. Just before I came on with you, I was on our Zoom Saturday meeting. Our early voting has opened up here, and I'm still doing the phone bank and what have you. So there's tons of good people. There is really a chance we could flip Florida. And if we do, I'm going to take credit. It's going to be because I moved down here.
We'll get credit.
There's all types of folks, but there's plenty. If some of you saw the retweeted video that our dear president retweeted of somebody yelling white power on their little golf cart, that was actually took place after a beautiful memorial to George Floyd and others that the African American club here, the African American Male Club, that they organized this beautiful memorial. There are about 300-400 people there. And then afterwards, a couple people on their golf carts went riding around honking with Trump signs on their golf carts. So it's different after the murders and whatever. It was, I have to say, really hard. Obviously, nothing compared to what people of color experience. I just didn't know who to talk to, who to go to. I was so gutted, so raw, and I felt surrounded. And now it's evened out a little bit, and the more I get involved in with the progressive groups, there's a progressive ladies lunch. There's a lot of things going on here that we don't hear about. And just like people would say, oh, if you go to Chicago, you're going to get shot, right? For people to say it's all racist down here is just news liking to build up those stories.
So we've really enjoyed sharing just a little bit and could go on for quite a while. We want to make sure that people know how to get in contact with you. So look at the information on the screen as we posted here. We have some other news from the neighborhood maybe to share with you as we continue with our headlines of the week. $10 million got awarded to Auburn Gresham this past week, actually for 2 projects that affect food and sustainability in that neighborhood. Right around 79th and Halsted is where one of them is. But it's a really great greening project. And, you know, we like to find things in the midst of everything else we're doing here that point out to some efforts to regrow these communities that we've been dealing with and struggling with alongside with for or living in for over 50 years now.
We also have been keeping track of some of the less wonderful things that are surrounding us right now, and just to keep people up to date on the ongoing sabotage of the United States Postal Service by the newly named Postmaster General and Trump crony Louis DeJoy. He issued a sweeping overhaul of the agency as of right now, yesterday, ousting top execs from key posts and reshuffling more than 24 other officials. And the quote that goes with the article is, Trump is actively sabotaging the election under our noses. It isn't theoretical, it's happening. So for those who are looking to help the election happen, go to those who are protecting the vote, whether it's by mail or cast in person. And yeah, we'll keep track of it while we're talking to you as well.
Back here in Illinois, Michael Madigan is still Speaker of the Illinois House of Representatives. However, there is really a growing call for him to resign, and in large measure, it's been led by our own state representative, Kelly Cassidy. This week, the Chicago Progressive Bloc in the City Council came on board, and Carol Ronan, the ward committee woman over in the 48th Ward, also joined in calling for Madigan's resignation. This is big news, and it's not going to go away.
We also want to acknowledge the in the ongoing shooting epidemic that we're seeing around the city. A local student leader, Khalid Reed, he would have been a senior at Mather. He was found shot on Granville Avenue. He was a leader in the No Cops and UCPS. Alderman Vasquez, amongst others, called him a up-and-coming leader whose passing is one more sign about the need to stop guns falling in our city. What got greater headlines was the Oak Street shooting of a rapper by the name of FBD Duck, otherwise his real name is Carlton Weekly. What I thought was significant about that major headline, getting more attention because it was a downtown shooting, was his mom a couple of days later pleading that there not be vengeance in a summer in a city that has just seen too much of that going on.
I think we're running out of time, are we not?
Want to remind people, if you haven't done the census, it's really important. The Census Bureau's decided to cut their counting by a month. That could leave 60 million Americans uncounted. That means Illinois gets less money. Please fill it out online. If you haven't done it already, it's one of the more critical things before the November election. Please fill out your census.
And what about the fair tax amendment?
First thing on your ballot, it's a chance for voters to actually say something about how we raise money to pay the bills in Illinois. 97% of us will see no change or reduction in our income tax. The rich will pay more. It's about time we have a fair tax. Please vote yes for the fair tax. Michael, what's going on in the sports world?
Okay, well, the family here started watching the Michael Jordan documentary again. I was enjoying it, but I did nod out. If you follow sports, there are a lot of virus issues with Major League Baseball. A lot of games being canceled, including the Cubs. There's also sex abuse scandal stuff continues in gymnastics and now in equestrian circles. And I was looking at a magazine online called The Undefeated. It's a great journal, and a guy named Steve Wolf wrote a piece that said sport and protest is not new. The history of sport protests goes deep back, way back on January 13 in the year 532 AD.
Really way back.
At the chariot races in Constantinople, rival drivers from the Blues and the Greens teams asked the emperor Justinian to pardon two of their followers who had been condemned to die. His refusal led to the Nika Revolt, 6 weeks of rioting that resulted in the deaths of 30,000 people. So basically, taking the knee for the national anthem isn't something that's new. Athletes in current times have been moved to protest conditions to demonstrate that there are sins of conscience to speak truth to power. The following timeline in sport, he has a timeline from 1863 up to Colin Kaepernick taking the knee. It's a worthwhile article, and it's in The Undefeated. And let's just note that Colin Kaepernick has still not been signed by any pro football team. And with that said, we want to ask all of you people out there to continue listening to us. You can listen to this show on WLUW 88.7 or WLUW.org on Saturday morning next week. And it's anytime you want on youtube.com/Heartland Media. And now we're on CNN, or excuse me, I keep saying that, it's CAN TV. We're going to make it to CNN, but right now it's CAN TV, website and their programs, because they're showing our shows again. We do some thanks at the end of the show. We want to thank Susan O'Halloran for coming on the show. And we want to thank Susan Clark for her continued, ongoing, wonderful post-production work. To WLUW for having us on the air. And we want to thank the other members of the team who are not here on the Zoom with us, but that would be Lynn Orman and James Porter. And once again, we encourage you all to do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that we do. Over and out. Power to the people. Have a great week. See you next week.
Let's go out with a little bit of Twin Peaks here so that everyone can get off with the rest of their week in fine form.